So how would you take vested and embed it into a bidding process? And we'd been toying with this, and this for a while. We were kind of calling it a request for partner process, and they gave us really the test bed to pilot this process, and it was very successful actually. And they now have done the Canadian government's on their fourth deal, so it's pretty cool to see them. And they've been so generous that they've allowed us to profile their case study, and so we have a wonderful white paper that's been quite popular. Actually, I've been really surprised at how popular it is, especially among governments. State of Tennessee's now piloted the process, and it really says how do we bring in the vested 5 rules and these contractual elements right up front into the bid process. So it's really a more collaborative, solution-oriented. You're seeking a partner and not a proposal for a spec.
Right, because you don't know what the spec is. And actually, I'm going to link up to that white paper just as an aside in the show notes. I'll give the show notes towards the end of the episode. But you're essentially buying an outcome. You're buying an innovation. You're not really sure what the scope of work is. And so you're partnering with somebody to figure that out. How do they help you build a business, solve a business challenge by the sounds of it, as opposed to something that's more defined?
Yeah, you think about the traditional request for partner process, and you write the requirements. You've given the supplier the spec, and then you bid it out, and the suppliers are apples, to apples. And I've seen the grading sheets for suppliers, and oftentimes the buyer has an Excel spreadsheet, so they have little requirements on the side, and they have, each column's a different.
I've been there and done that.
Each column's a different supplier, and you're adding it up and you're scoring them, and it's an apple to apple comparison. And then you're trying to do a best value. If you're really cool, you're doing a best value analysis. But the point is, you've outsourced. You want to outsource to the expert. You're not the expert. You can't write the requirements. And then think about it this way: a true desired outcome is the future. It's a desired outcome. So how do you buy the future? How do you buy innovation? You can't write a spec for that. So we really have to bring in the suppliers as experts to help co-create during that bidding process. Very collaborative approach right up front into the bid.
So how do you do that then? By definition, a bidding process is more than one party bidding for work, with others. So do you bring all of them into the process or run the same process with multiple different suppliers all at the same time? So you can still do that. Some kind of definition of what success looks like as you put one against another, or I'm interested how kind of the process that you go through and how you involve the different parties in that.
Yeah, and in the white paper, there's actually 6 steps in the process that's broken down into 20 more discrete steps. We teach in the white paper to have a parallel process, but a very quick down select. But we have seen in the state of Tennessee, for example, brought all the suppliers together in one room. We don't believe that's as efficient. So it worked. Don't get me wrong. It did work. They got a good end result, but it is hard to pull off. And I think the process where you kind of do a parallel is a little bit better. And the reason why is you want to be as transparent as possible with these suppliers, because they will feed on that. So the more information you give them, the better their solution. So you start out with a bunch of suppliers. And so you're just simply picking a few, 3, no more than 6, based on pure capabilities. So you're capable, you're in the mix. So let's say, in the Vancouver Coastal Health example, in their original process that we write about in the white paper and in the case study, they started with 3 capable suppliers. So you couldn't even get in unless you were known to be capable. And then they move into what's called a concept phase. So the concept phase is where you start to give as much information as you can to these 3 suppliers, very transparent. And the suppliers then have direct access to your stakeholders. So it's not procurement.
You're not protecting somebody.
So there's no middleman. And it's like, all right, we're going to bring in, our OR nurses today because you're going to be bidding on how to do environmental services in the OR. Well, OR environmental services are very different than ER. The emergency room are very, very different than the nursing homes. And so they actually have direct access to the stakeholders. They have data, and so they get to ask whatever. If they have a question, you ask it. And what I liked about the Vancouver Coastal Health process is that the questions were proprietary. So if a supplier asked a question, the supplier got information. And the better questions they ask, the better their solution.
Interesting.
So you could really start to see the suppliers who were smarter because they built on
more
it.
interesting questions.
More interesting questions, got better data, could do better solutions. So you're giving a very short period for the concept because this takes a lot of time and energy from the suppliers, and so you don't want to draw them out. So you want to, if you've ever heard that term, throw spaghetti on the wall and see what sticks, right? So you're giving them. In the Canadian government also is doing an IT deal right now, which is publicly out there. Their RFP is they gave each supplier a week, one dedicated week to come and interact and collect your data, do whatever.
So each party gets that week of unvetted access essentially to the people that they need. Go at it and see what you can get that will help you define a solution or deliver an outcome, essentially.
So you throw it up on the wall, get feedback, kind of see what sticks. And so there's criteria. So just like any bid process, you need to have criteria. We advocate for very transparent criteria. So don't go changing the rules after the fact.
Because you like somebody who was a salesperson at one of the organizations, so you change the process so that they end up being the winner.
And we want the suppliers to understand the criteria, to understand the weighting of that criteria, so it's very clear how they're going to get selected. And so the best suppliers then go through. So usually that's 2 suppliers. So if you started out with 4, now you've got 2. And now you're going to go through the same process, but a little bit more protracted. So they're going to get access to even more information. So in Vancouver Coastal Health, for example, they gave access to the full budget data. Here's what it costs today. Here's everything we know, right? Now go play with that data. Help us understand how we could actually be better, faster, cheaper, smarter. So you go through this very interactive, collaborative solutioning phase. And in an RF partner process, you actually are picking the supplier not only on their solution, but on their cultural fit and compatibility.